Kane. I'm the market president of KeyBank for this region. I'm a longtime board member of the World Affairs Council. For the past 9 years, KeyBank has been a proud supporter of the World Affairs Council. While we're one of the largest banks in the country, we have 1,100 branches across 15 states, $139 billion in assets. We do like to focus a lot of our philanthropy and investments locally. That is why we're very proud to support the World Affairs Council through its many programs. The Council has been providing the diverse population of Philadelphia with the opportunity to learn, experience, and share about the region, the nation, and the world. So I'd like to thank the World Affairs Council for the role that you play, and I really thank you for the partnership we have had over the years. Now, to get me out of the way, to moderate tonight's program with our distinguished guest, the former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, it's my pleasure to turn over the podium to the President of the World Affairs Council, Greg Snyder. Greg?
Thank you, Bob. Let me just echo that this is a true partnership. It's something that the Council tries to do with many of our sponsors to really work together to enrich the educational life of our community for everyone from middle school kids through adults. Our guest this evening is really truly, this is said about many people, but this is truly the case in this room, someone who needs no introduction. Governor Christie visited the televisions of Philadelphians daily throughout his tenure as governor of New Jersey and before that, and of course, in his highly impactful roles in the political life of our nation as a whole. So therefore, I'm not going to give you bio that you already know. Just ask you to please join me for a conversation to be followed by questions from all of you. Governor Chris Christie. Governor, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We know that you've been busy the last number of weeks since the release of the book, and
Yep.
We're happy that this can be an important stop on that tour. Part of what it's our job to do at the World Affairs Council is kind of play devil's advocate with our speakers. So I want to start.
I'm from New Jersey. That's a foreign concept to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. At least I'll be comfortable now. Let's go.
Well, we want you to be
Shut
at
up.
home. Be at home. Be at home.
There we go. Now we're rolling.
There we go. Let me finish.
Yes.
So there are people who have criticized your book and who say that when you sum it all up, that what you're really saying is if only Donald Trump and his team had followed rather than discarded the transition plan that you were the architect of. And if he had made you Attorney General, that this administration would be great. Is that what you're saying?
No, it'd be better. Right? So let's be clear. First of all, it wasn't my transition plan. We had 140 people who predominantly worked as volunteers from May of 2016 through November of 2016 to put together a 30-volume plan that dealt with every aspect of transitioning the presidency. Now, understand that this is really the first time something like this was being attempted this early, because there's a new law that went into effect after the 2012 election that said that the law now required that anybody who was still an active candidate beginning in May of the year of the presidential election needed to establish a transition organization in case they turned out to be the president to begin to work on the idea of transition, because Congress and everyone else understood that 73 days between Election Day and Inauguration Day is not enough time to plan the transfer, successful transfer of a $6 trillion operation. And so the plan that we put together dealt with every aspect of doing that. We had a plan for every week of the transition. that included not only themes that were consistent with what the president had discussed in the campaign, but also would have rollouts of key cabinet members consistent with that theme during that period of time, and key public events to reinforce the theme that the president was trying to advocate for that week. We had a day one plan. Day one plan was all the things we wanted him to do on the first day. That's centered on executive orders. We had an entire executive order plan that was written by a group of 20 lawyers that had either or both experience in the Department of Justice and or the White House counsel's office. And they were all vetted for the best prediction we can make as to the legal efficacy of those executive orders. We had a 100-day plan for the president to execute both continued executive action and a congressional impact. And then a 200-day plan, because really a 100-day plan is kind of a historic anachronism. It's really 200 days that gets you to the first session of Congress going on their summer break. We had our top three recommendations for every cabinet office, sub-cabinet office, and senior White House staff, all who had been gone through extensive public vetting, which was done in a room that only 15 people had access to, with computers that were not part of a network, where every one of those people were publicly vetted, and each one of them had a section of a binder so that the president-elect could review their qualifications. So was I the architect of that? Yes, I was the architect of the idea of how to do it. But it was the work of scholars from AEI and scholars from the Heritage Foundation and scholars from Cato and people who came and had enormous experience. Ed Meese was there and in charge of reviewing the Justice Department operations and making recommendations. And there was that kind of quality of people who were volunteering their time. So when Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, and Rick Dearborn made the decision to throw that out because they were upset with me, they weren't hurting me. They were hurting the president and they were hurting the country. And so, yeah, I plead guilty to the fact that I think that if you took that 30-volume plan and at least considered it, that you'd be better off than what they did, which was 71 days on the back of an envelope with an apprentice-style recruitment at the Bedminster Trump National Golf Club. I was happy about the fact that it was happening in Bedminster. It was a lot of extra economic activity for my state. But other than that, I didn't favor the process.
Thank you. So, could you, if you had to pick out, let's say, 3 things that you think would substantively have been different if the plan had been followed, what would they be?
First, the travel ban that was put into effect would not have been the travel ban that was put into effect. We actually had an executive order drafted that dealt with the concern the president had about travel to countries and from countries that had a history of terrorist activity against the United States, and one that we think would have passed constitutional muster. Instead, Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon wrote an executive order like on a Big Mac box, and gave it to the president to sign. And as a result, what we had was litigation, but worse than litigation, we had enormous division right off the bat. That would have been different. Secondly, we would have just had better quality people. The last act I took as transition chairman was to argue with the president-elect about his proposed appointment of Mike Flynn as National Security Advisor. Now, the president-elect and I had been arguing about this for 6 months, and I continued to advocate to him not to put Mike Flynn in that kind of position of responsibility. The day after the election, when I met with him to update him on the status of transition and what decisions were needed to be made that day, he said, "Oh, by the way, I made a decision. I'm putting Mike Flynn in." And I said, "Mr. President-elect, please don't do this." I said, this guy is a train wreck. You cannot put him in a position where he's going to be the person who is supposed to be building consensus between the State Department, the Defense Department, and the intelligence agencies to bring you a cogent, coherent either plan or argument on how to deal with foreign policy issues. He's temperamentally ill-suited for that kind of job. And the president, as was his wont to do at times, he's like, you just don't like him. And I said, yeah, you're right. I don't like him. You want to know why? And he said, yeah. And I said, because he's going to get you in trouble. Now, 24 days after the inauguration, my wife and I were invited to have lunch with the president on Valentine's Day, 2017. What had he done the day before? He had fired Mike Flynn. And this is the beauty of Donald Trump and our 17-year relationship. We sat down to lunch. He goes, what do you think about me firing Flynn? I looked at him, I said, what do you think I think of you firing Flynn? And the president looked at me and goes, did you like him? I said, no. We're not playing this game, okay? That like you don't quite remember what my position was on Mike Flynn. And he started to laugh and said, yeah, no, believe me, I remember. I said, okay. So there would have been much different personnel there. Significantly, I'll give you another example. Tom Price would have never been the Secretary of Health and Human Services. No disrespect to former members of the House of Representatives, if there are any here, or anyone related to any former members of the House of Representatives. But typically, the only thing they've ever managed in their life is a district office and a DC office, which amounts to maybe 30 or 40 people, max. You're not going to take this guy, and he ran a family medical practice in Georgia. You're not going to take this guy and you're going to put him in charge of the second largest department behind the Pentagon in the American government, responsible for the health services and other human services that are given by the government to those most in need. You're going to put that guy in charge of it. He was not on our list. Who was first on our list? Alex Azar, who happens to be now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Why do I think the transition was so important? Azar's name was never placed in front of the president-elect to be considered by that group that he had running the transition after we left. When his name was placed in front of the president-elect, he picked Alex Azar. It's not that Donald Trump can't make good choices, but everyone in this room knows the theory of the garbage in, garbage out theory of management. If you put lousy choices in front of him, he's not going to say, usually, these are all lousy choices, give me more. He's going to pick the best of the lousy choices and move on because he's got too many decisions to make. So that would have been significantly different personnel. The third thing would have been, there would have been some sense of cohesion to the plan to address Congress. The transition plan urged him to begin with tax reform. To then, after achieving tax reform, to pursue a national infrastructure plan. And then and only then, after those two, to pursue the change of Obamacare. Why? We thought that was both a practical and a political way to go about it. The practical being that his party, after winning the White House back after 8 years, you'd want to get them to do something that they all want to do. And cut taxes and change the corporate rate and all the rest was something that all Republicans, whether you're evangelical, Freedom Caucus, or whether you were moderate, Collar County, Pennsylvania Republicans, could all agree on. So get your party to agree on all that and give them some red meat for the base to keep everybody happy. Then reach out to the Democrats to build an infrastructure plan. Something that Democrats would support, something that most Republicans will support. You probably lose the Freedom Caucus, but you gain a lot of moderate Democrats at the time who would come out and vote for it, and it's a plan that's needed, and the president campaigned upon it. After having two big wins like that in a row, then and only then, when you have that much political capital and the country so happy about the fact that their taxes have been cut, and that economic growth is coming and infrastructure will be rebuilt, then you deal with the difficult issue of Obamacare. Instead, he had the people that I called to him, the propeller heads, say to him, oh no, you have to do Obamacare first because the money we save from Obamacare will pay for the tax cut. I said, Mr. President, as soon as you make that argument, people are going to be opposed to your Obamacare plan. And then you're going to lose the Obamacare plan. And then you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And you're going to have to do the tax cut just to stay afloat politically. Excuse me. So, he said, yeah, I agree with that. And then 2 days later, he called me. Can you hold that for a second?
Sure.
2 days later, he called me and said, I spoke to Paul Ryan. He told me I can't do that. And I said, I thought I told you not to listen to the propeller heads. Ronald Reagan didn't worry about that in 1981. What paid for Ronald Reagan's tax cut ultimately was the incredible economic growth that it created. And Reagan was willing to have the patience to wait for that to happen rather than let the propeller heads win the argument. Those are 3 ways that it would have been significantly different, I think.
So let's say that you had, in fact, been made Attorney General. There would not have been a recusal issue. The issue of possible collusion and the other investigation matters would have fallen into your bailiwick. How would that have been different?
Well, we would have had no Bob Mueller, so it would have been significantly different in that regard. Listen, Jeff Sessions, let's dispense with this myth too. Jeff Sessions did not recuse because he was involved in the campaign. Because if that were the case, he would have recused on January 20th. It wasn't like, he recused on March 4th. So it wasn't like he forgot between Election Day and March 3rd that he'd been involved in the campaign. Then all of a sudden woke up on March 4th and said, damn, I was involved in the campaign. I should recuse. No, what happened was the week before March 4th, he got caught lying to Congress. Remember? In his confirmation hearings, he said, I never met with any Russians. Then all of a sudden, they got pictures of him with Kislyak. They've got records of him at those meetings. And people are camped outside his apartment every morning saying, what were you talking about there, General? And this is what happens when you select a backbench Alabama senator whose toughest race in his life was when he got 65% of the vote. And then you put him into the hottest seat in the Trump administration, which is predictable would be the hottest seat, Attorney General. President asked me later on, why do you think he recused? I said he recused because he got caught lying and they put the heat on him. And Mr. President, when somebody gets the heat put on them, who's never had the heat put on them before, he thought he was getting 3rd-degree burns when all he was getting was a tan. I said, but if you've never had the heat on you before, you can't tell the difference. And so he cut and ran on the President of the United States and left him holding the bag. And so then, he didn't want to take the responsibility, so he hands it off to poor Rod Rosenstein, who, I served with as U.S. attorneys. We were together when I was in New Jersey. He was U.S. attorney in Maryland, Bush 43 administration. No one wants the deputy attorney general in charge of anything, right? He runs the department day to day, but you don't want him as the marquee person. That's not what you hire that person for. That's your COO, not your CEO. CEO took a walk, so the CEO said, I got to get a substitute CEO. Enter Bob Mueller. And so that would have been significantly different. And I don't know that the investigation itself in terms of pace or style would have been any different if I was running it, because I don't know what Bob Mueller knows. Until I know what Bob Mueller knows, I won't be able to tell you whether I would have done it differently or not. But what I think people know in this audience from having watched me be U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 7 years is I would have done it aggressively. I would have done it fairly. And if people deserved to be charged, they would have been charged. And I would have done so without any favor or bias. But the president would have known that the person he picked as attorney general was in charge, not some guy named Bob Mueller who he didn't know. Now, I haven't been one of those people critical of Bob Mueller. I know Bob. I worked with him when he's head of the FBI, and I was U.S. attorney. I think he's a man of real integrity and honesty, and I think he's acquitted himself very well in this investigation. He's not been leaking. Nobody really knows what he knows, which is the way it's supposed to be. And I've continued to tell the president, don't, keep criticizing the guy. One, because he doesn't deserve it. But two, let's put that aside for a second. Let's be selfish. Don't poke the bear, man. I said to him any number of times, Mr. President, there's no way you can make this shorter, but there's lots of ways you can make it longer, and you're doing it. You know, the more you tweet, the more you yell and scream about this, you give them another rabbit hole to run down. You make it longer and longer. He wouldn't have had that issue if he had an attorney general who hadn't recused. So I think that would have made things significantly different. But once he picked Jeff Sessions initially and Jeff recused, you know, there's nothing you could do to put that toothpaste back in the tube. It was done. And we got Bob Mueller, and for better or for worse, we're almost 2 years in to a Bob Mueller investigation, which is a long time and has eaten up a lot of the president's energy and attention, most importantly, a lot of his emotional energy. Because believe me, whenever I talk to him, you barely get through a phone conversation with him where it doesn't come up. And even if there's nothing particularly going on that day, you know, he'll say, you know, I never met a Russian. You know that, right? Not one Russian, never met one, you know. He continues to just want to let you know that he didn't have anything to do with colluding. And, you know, the fact is that he shouldn't be in that position. His attorney general should be the one taking that heat for him. You serve the principle and you serve the Constitution. And Jeff Sessions served neither.
So you have known the president for 17 years. He certainly knows your record. You were the first major public official to endorse him in the primaries. Why didn't he make you attorney general?
You know, read the book. But listen, the answer is I can't be 100% sure. But I think, as with many of the things that happened during that period of time, his son-in-law is at the root of the issue.
So let's talk about sort of where we are now on some of these investigative fronts. We've had this extraordinary thing where the Southern District of New York essentially accuses the president of a crime. We have arguably tax and other financial crimes that would be linked to that campaign finance crime. Then we have the other day Michael Cohen testifying about a host of other crimes that he alleges in terms of the president and the Trump organization: bank fraud, insurance fraud violations, violations of statutes governing charities, the Trump Foundation. There are a host of alleged crimes, some of which appear to have credible evidence behind them. How do you evaluate this presidency? Is it plagued in the way that the Nixon presidency was under Watergate, with a patina of criminality?
No, because the Nixon presidency was not plagued with a patina of criminality. It was plagued with a president who was a criminal. And we don't, and by the way, was a criminal regarding the work of the presidency. And, you know, I think that what's happening right now with Donald Trump is much more analogous to Bill Clinton than it is to Richard Nixon. So with Richard Nixon, when you are ordering people to firebomb the Brookings Institute, when you're president of the United States, when you are ordering the break-in and wiretapping of your opponent's national campaign headquarters, and then, you know, infamously saying on tape to your White House counsel, how much would it take to keep these guys quiet? And he says, I don't know, $1 million. He says, oh, $1 million in cash, we could get that. I know where it could be gotten. There's no patina there anymore, man. You know, it's like, pretty much, you know, you're committing crimes of obstruction of justice and a number of others. And it goes to the heart of the presidency. It is, you are using the powers of the office to commit crimes. What's Donald Trump's been accused of so far seems to be much more analogous to what Bill Clinton was ultimately impeached for, which was conduct that happened while he was president, but really had nothing to do with the presidency or the conduct of public business. It was his private business, in this case, his sex life, that became the subject of, and there are a lot of analogies here, What did Bill Clinton get in trouble for? He got in trouble for lying in the end about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Why did he lie about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky? It wasn't for any governmental reason. It was because the woman who he slept next to didn't know about Monica Lewinsky, and he thought it was probably in his best interest that she not ever know about Monica Lewinsky. So let's take the campaign finance matter. Michael Cohen helped the president, I think, this week on Wednesday, because he said there wasn't one reason for the payment to Stormy Daniels. There were, in fact, two. Yes, he says, as he's admitted, that it was to try to protect the president during the campaign. But he says also that Mr. Trump was motivated by keeping this from Melania. And that, in fact, to further buttress his own testimony on that, he says, Michael Cohen, in fact, affirmatively lied to the First Lady about the purpose of that payment in order to conceal this relationship between his boss from his boss's wife. Now, that's distasteful, as was Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky, but it's not a crime. It is not a crime for anyone in this audience tonight to pay someone you've had a relationship with in order to ensure that they don't tell your spouse. It's just not a crime. So I think prosecutors, no matter what they said in that initial indictment, I used to say to my guys and women all the time, if you're going to come and advocate for me to bring an indictment against a very high-profile person, you better make sure it's a headshot, because we can't shoot and miss. Well, if that was the case with Governor Jim McGreevey, or that was the case with State Senator John Lynch or Charles Kushner, you can bet that's the case on former President Donald Trump, because he won't be able to have this case brought against him when he's president. And when he leaves, you better make sure you can get him. And now he's going to stand up on the witness stand and say, I didn't do it for the election. I did it to protect my wife and my marriage. And by the way, who's my number one witness? Michael Cohen. Now, he says there's this other reason. He's dead wrong about that. Does that create reasonable doubt? My guess is it could. And so I think on that score, it's much more analogous to the Clinton situation, not only legally, but also politically, because you're not going to get 67 votes in the United States Senate to remove Donald Trump from office for that, or for a tax crime, or that he got a lower insurance premium when he was a real estate developer because he said he was worth $7 billion instead of $5. There's not going to be 67 U.S. senators who are going to say, if we had known that about Trump, the American people would have never voted for him. If they knew that he tried to swindle those beloved insurance companies, God knows we would have never elected him president, right? Come on. In the same way that the Republicans were on a fool's errand in the late 90s, thinking they were ever going to get 67 votes from United States senators to remove Bill Clinton because he lied about an affair under oath to his wife. I mean, I think that probably falls under the category for a lot of those senators of there, but for the grace of God go I. So you were not going to get 2/3 vote on that either. So I think where we are right now is that's the analogous situation. Now, there could be a lot more to come, and we don't know. And that's why I've said for the last 9 months, the much more dangerous investigation to the president and his people is the Southern District of New York for 3 reasons. One, they have no restrictions on what they can do. Mueller is restricted to Russia and Russia-related activities. Southern District's not restricted by anything because Trump is a New York resident on top of everything else. So he's subject to their jurisdiction. The other 2 reasons are Michael Cohen and Rick Gates. In Michael Cohen, they have a tour guide through the Trump business and the Trump personal life. In Rick Gates, they have a tour guide through the Trump inaugural. You never want, if you're a defendant, tour guides for the prosecutors. And so those create questions and issues that we don't know what the resolution will be yet. So that could, by analysis of the danger to the president, could change. But right now, I think it's much more analogous to a Bill Clinton situation than it is to a Richard Nixon.
So you seem to be saying, and certainly other defenders of the president seem to be saying, I would say, that there's kind of a distinction between sort of serious crimes and minor crimes, or serious crimes versus what some people are calling process crimes.
Right.
Crimes that seem to have been almost invented by the investigation, some would argue, right?
Right.
Is that the case, or is it the case that if the president were to be, in fact, guilty of a number of white-collar crimes, that is impeachable?
Well, it's impeachable. I just don't think it's removable. Remember, we use impeachment as kind of like this generic term for both actions. There are two actions. Impeachment is like an indictment. All right? So when you're indicted, you're not guilty. You're just charged. That's what the House does. They impeach. It's a lot easier to do. It's been done twice. Right? Andrew Johnson was impeached in the 1860s, and Bill Clinton was impeached. But no one's ever been removed. So what I'd say to you is that those crimes are clearly impeachable if proven. But I don't think that they're going to overturn the results of an American election based upon insurance fraud. It's not that it's a lesser crime. It's that we've made the decision in this country constitutionally that a president cannot be charged in a criminal court while he's president. That, in fact, the only way to deal with that is through the political process that the Constitution sets up of impeachment and removal. And so I just think that I wouldn't call them non-serious crimes. I prosecuted plenty of people for a lot of those non-serious crimes. They're serious crimes. But we're talking about the President of the United States here. And we're talking about the reversal of a national election. So it seems to me that my standard would be there would have to be crimes committed in office using the power of the office. That's the test that Nixon met. That neither Johnson, Andrew, or Bill Clinton met. And I think that's why the Senate wisely didn't remove either one of those presidents, but would have removed Richard Nixon because what he did went to the heart of the abuse of his power as president, as opposed to a criminal act which had little or nothing to do with his conduct as president.
Thank you. So let's turn to the Russia side of the equation. So you write in the book that almost any politician would want to see unfavorable information about an opponent come to light, but not any politician would want that information stolen by a hostile foreign power.
Sure.
And so you also write that Don McGahn would not have allowed the Trump Tower meeting had it been presented to him in a meeting in which dirt was allegedly offered regarding from the Russians regarding Hillary. Is that meeting, and what we know about it from Donald Trump Jr.'s email thread, is that evidence of acts in furtherance of a conspiracy against the United States? And then two more parts of what we know. If it's true that Manafort gave a Russian intelligence-connected operative internal polling data of the campaign, and if it's also true, as Michael Cohen testified this week, that Roger Stone told the president about the impending dump by WikiLeaks before it happened, can those three things, at least those three things, be connected as a conspiracy against the United States?
No. Here's why. We'll break it down. So the first piece is the meeting in Trump Tower. So the meeting in Trump Tower is now in the Hall of Fame. It's official if the votes come in. It's in the Hall of Fame of political stupidity. I mean, the Hall of Fame of political stupidity. And given the people who were there, not shocking. Okay? I mean, these are people, two of whom, Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, who had no experience in national politics at all. The third of which, Paul Manafort, is a longtime political criminal. So the fact that this was a stupid meeting, when you get the attendance list, just is not a shock. However, there'd have to be further acts taken in furtherance of the conspiracy. And essentially, as the story is told now, they offer some vague type of offers about we have information on her, but nobody acts on it. That's the Trump campaign I know, right? Like I say in the book, they're not organized enough to collude. I mean, it takes some measure of organization to follow up on that, right? So we have all this stuff, got it. And then nobody does anything, right? So like they weren't organized enough to collude. So I don't think that meeting, as stupid as it was, and as much as the top of Don McGahn's head had to blow off when that ultimately came to light, it's also part of the disdain of that trio for lawyers. Oh, the lawyers, they only complicate things. Oh, yeah. We complicate things, all right, like keeping you out of being investigated for engaging in a potential criminal conspiracy. One of the little nittling things that we, like to try to do for you, So I don't think that amounts to that. Point two, which one was point two?
Polling data.
Polling data. Hey, listen, there's so much polling data around, and the idea that the Trump polling data had some secret sauce that would give the Russians some type of roadmap as to who to target, that's as if thinking that polling data has that kind of import. It just doesn't. First of all, polling data these days sucks because you don't know how to poll people anymore. We're trying to poll people on these things because lots of people don't even have home phone numbers anymore, right? You're trying to get them on this. You don't really know who owns it. For instance, if you look at who the phones are registered to, in my house, every phone is registered to me because even for my 25-year-old and 23-year-old children, because even though they've graduated from college and have a full-time job, why the hell should they pay for their own cell phone? If mom and dad are going to continue to pay for it, what the hell, why not? So a pollster looks at that and they go like, this is Chris Christie. Son of a gun has 6 cell phones. Boy, what an ego, right? When they call, they know who they're calling or who they're talking to. Online polling is not yet sophisticated enough and is much too, much too required to have people take affirmative steps to do it. So I just don't think that the Trump people or the Clinton people, for that matter, obviously, because they were like humming "Hail to the Chief" on election day. So their polling data, I wasn't that great either. I remember watching Hillary land in Westchester Airport right the morning of the election. And I mean, she walked off there as if like she already had kind of the regal robing on, right? She was walking down, looking around, doing this thing. I'm like, man, I remember standing with my wife watching it going, yeah, man, she thinks she's winning. So I think that Paul Manafort, and the third piece of it is, what was Manafort's motive? Manafort's motive was not to get them to help him with the election. Manafort's motive was to keep his Russian patrons happy because he owed them money. And he's trying to do anything he could to let them know how on the inside he is. So don't mess with me because my guy may win. And so give me, another 6 months to pay my tab back. I think that was the motivation. I don't think that scores it. And then the third one, Stone. Yeah. First of all, any sentence that begins, Roger Stone told me, should really, just be discounted. But let's take it at face value. That Roger Stone, someone asked me if that story has credibility. I said, the only part of that story that has credibility to me is that Donald Trump had somebody on the speakerphone. Because whenever I was in there with him over the years, if somebody would call, he'd put him on the speaker. For 2 reasons. One, he likes talking on the speaker. And 2, he likes knowing who's calling him. Like, especially, like if it's somebody who's not important, he'll pick up the phone. But if it's somebody who's important or you think you might think is important, it's going on the speaker, man. So who is this again? Barack Obama calling me Donald Trump? Excellent. I have Chris in the room with me. Chris, say hello, Because he wants him to know that I'm in the office too. It's a whole thing. But let's say it's true. Let's say Stone had spoken to WikiLeaks directly, which he denies, but let's say it's true that he did. And then he picked up the phone and called Trump and said, by the way, WikiLeaks tells me that they're going to be dumping a whole bunch of negative email stuff on Hillary Clinton. Doesn't get us to the Russians. Now, there are intelligence theories out there that say that it was Russian intelligence which supplied the information to WikiLeaks, but no one says that's what Stone knew, or that if in fact Stone knew that, he told Trump that. In fact, what Cohen says is, on that score, I have no idea. And in fact, no, Roger Stone didn't say that day. It's WikiLeaks was going to do that whether Donald Trump liked it or hated it, because that's what WikiLeaks does. So I don't think that scores the point either. None of this stuff is smart, but believe me, if we start prosecuting people for being dumb, get ready to build a lot more jails, everybody. We say in New Jersey all the time, we pride ourselves on having some of the dumbest criminals in America. And that's the only way we catch them, is they're dumb, right? So there's a lot of dumb stuff, but I don't think it's a lot of criminal stuff, at least not yet, based on what we know, and that's the stuff that we do know.
So let's talk about the president choosing to be surrounded by so many people who you think are dumb.
Well, some wasn't by choice. Some were born into his family.
We'll let that land for a minute. So, I mean, in the book, you term people who have been in very important roles in the administration, amateurs and grifters and stupid. But isn't the person in charge responsible, right? Doesn't the buck stop with the president? And isn't he responsible for picking all these people?
He's ultimately accountable. I'd say it's different than responsible. When you're the head of an organization as large as the United States government, you are ultimately accountable for every one of those selections, but you may not necessarily be responsible for every one of them. And the distinction there is important based on the garbage in, garbage out theory I was talking to you about before. Listen, as governor, I made thousands of appointments. On any percentage of them, a large percentage of them, I was going on the basis of a recommendation from somebody else. Because if you're making thousands of appointments as governor, you can't know every one of them. You just can't. You can't even meet every one of them, let alone know every one of them. So what do? You rely upon the people around you to vet them. You rely upon members of the state legislature or the Congress, in the president's case, to make recommendations. And you say, well, all right, he's a decent guy. Or I don't know if this guy's a decent guy or not, but I need to do a favor for Congressman X or State Senator Y. And so I'm going to put this guy in, unless the state police tell me there's some like criminal flags there. So there's a difference between responsible and accountable. But there are some of these choices that he made, and I know he made, that were really bad. And I think the reason for that is he's impulsive. People have asked me what I think the president's largest weakness is, and I said it's his impulsivity. And that leads to some of the things that he says publicly that are damaging. It leads to some decisions that are damaging, is that he's impulsive. And what you need are people around you who recognize your weaknesses and are willing to confront your weaknesses. We all have them. You know, when I was governor, my biggest failing as governor would be when I made up my mind, I'd stop listening. Not intentionally, but I'd be like, okay, next. And they go, no, we have a couple of other things that we need to tell you. Like, I listen, I'm smart, I get this. I've made my decision, let's move on. And my chiefs of staff were uniquely equipped, because they had long relationships with me, to not do it then, because then they would just get a reflexive response. Did you hear me? I said, I've decided. What's next? They'd leave, and then, depending upon the urgency of the matter, 15 minutes, half an hour, 3 days later, they'd come in and go, by the way, on X. You didn't want to hear all the rest of it. You need to hear all the rest of it. I've heard all the rest of it, and I think you need to hear all the rest of it. That's not always a pleasant thing to have to do, because you're basically coming in and saying to the principal, hey, dummy, you thought you really understood everything? Not so much. Do you think you're the smartest guy in the room? Not so much. The president needs more of those people around him who are willing to, because you'll get a negative reaction at times. Like when I do that with him, when the moments when he's very aggravated with me, he'll say to me, didn't I beat you? Like, if you're so smart, why am I here and you're not? You know, I mean, you got to be willing to put up with that. You got to go like, yeah, like I remember one time that happening about a particular personnel issue, and I said to him, yes, that is true. You did beat me. If you have a half an hour, we can go through all the reasons I think that might have happened, but I don't think we need to waste our time on that right now. Let's get back. I'll concede the point. You did win. Let's get back to the point of what I'm trying to get to you. You need to have more people around him who are willing to do that, and will be able to stop him from making some of the impulsive hires. You know, who are the impulsive hires? Mike Flynn's an impulsive hire. You know, Omarosa. I don't know what the hell she was doing there. And I'm sure one day he just went, I hired her on The Apprentice, I'll hire her here. What could go wrong, right? Someone needs to grab him and go, no, this isn't good. So he's accountable. And by the way, he's accountable another way. He's paying the political price for it, okay? Paul Manafort's going to jail. That gets tagged on him. George Papadopoulos going to jail, gets tagged on him. Rick Gates going to jail, tagged on him. Michael Cohen going to jail, tagged on him. I mean, so he's made those choices, and he is paying a price for it, as is the country. So I think he is accountable for it, but what I'm trying to say is give you a bigger argument than that. Not to acquit him of responsibility and accountability, but to make you understand how it happens. See, I think a book like mine is not important in telling you what happened. You know what happened pretty much, because mine's not a tell-all book, as you'll see. It's not, you know, there's some stuff that I'm going to talk to you about that you maybe didn't know, but it's not a kiss and tell. It is, here's why it happened. Here's how it happened. Not that it did happen. And I think that the reason the president's made some of these bad choices is his own impulsivity. And I think the other reason is that he's had some really lousy people around him who care more about their own power and authority than they care about the president. And they don't want strong people around the president, because if they do, those people's influence will diminish through the strength of these other folks. That's selfish. That's putting yourself before the country and before the principle you're supposed to be serving. And I think that's the other thing that's led to those kind of personnel decisions.
So let's move on from Donald Trump. Whether it's very soon or it's not for 6 years, there will be an America beyond Donald Trump. There will be a Republican Party beyond Donald Trump.
Yep.
Do you believe that the Republican Party post Donald Trump will have views on immigration, on trade, on America's role in the world that are more like Ronald Reagan or more like Donald Trump? Because on those issues, at least, they're quite opposite.
Be more like Reagan. And the reason I think that is because Trump is a phenomenon. He is a phenomenon that's based on personality, not based on philosophy. Because on most issues, the president doesn't really have a firm philosophy. He just doesn't. He's someone who is a pragmatist. He wants to get a deal done. He wants to get a certain thing accomplished. And he tries to figure out, where do I need to be positioned to be able to do that? It's pragmatism. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just another ism. Liberalism, conservatism, pragmatism. But I do think that it is particular to him that he gets away with an execution on that pragmatism that no one else could get away with. What do I mean? When Donald Trump says, John McCain's not a war hero, because I prefer people who don't get captured. I can tell you, when I was running for president at the time, I had been in Iowa the day before at the same event that he ultimately made that comment at the next day. I was back home in New Jersey, and when I heard that, I turned to my wife and I said, this is over. He's done. Like, this guy spent 6.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. He had an ability, he was tortured. He had the ability to get out because his father was an admiral. He refused. He stayed there so that his men would not be left behind. And he went on to have an extraordinarily distinguished career in the United States Senate as candidate for president. You can't say a guy like that's not a hero run for president and survive. By the way, I wasn't the only one who thought that. 20 minutes after it happened, the phone rang at my home. It was Jeb Bush. Now, we're all running against each other, right? Jeb calls me, he goes, listen, you heard the comments? I said I did. He goes, all right, so he's out. So he said, so now this is going to come down to me and you. And he said, so let's make a deal here. Let's be civil with each other. Let's restore civility to this process. We'll fight it out hard. Both of us want to win. We're both qualified to be president. Let's try to fight this out because Trump is now out of the way. Not so much, right? I mean, and go on and on and on. There's a different set of rules that have applied to Donald Trump than anybody in politics in my lifetime. Anyone. Bill Clinton got away with. Bill Clinton looks like he was engaged in nothing unconventional compared to Donald Trump. Remember, as you'll read in the book, I was one of 7 people in the room when the Billy Bush tape surfaced. It was quite a day. It's a different set of rules. So I think that no one else could pull off the high wire act that Donald Trump is pulling off within the Republican Party. And so as a result, I think that things move back more towards the traditional Republican views than stay near the more Trumpian type views. Some things may stay. I think his concern about immigration was within the party long before he showed up. I mean, we were arguing about immigration for a long time. He amped it up. But the underlying sentiment, we couldn't get an immigration reform bill passed under George W. Bush long before, Donald Trump ever became a factor in anything politically. So we can't, it's convenient for us to blame all of it on him if you don't like him, but it wouldn't be accurate or fair. And that's why I also think that the idea that Trump will be a long emulated model within the party as Reagan was, probably misses the mark too.
We're coming up on the next cycle, obviously, already in it.
We're in it.
We're in it. It certainly appears to most observers that the Democratic Party is lurching left and may well nominate a candidate who would be sort of conventionally defined to be the most left that any Democratic nominee has been, at least since 1972.
Yep.
Some people make the argument that a relatively left Democratic candidate means Donald Trump gets reelected. Others make the argument that America would choose any Democrat over Donald Trump, and that is why the Democrats can essentially sort it out only on the left. What do you think is true?
God, I pray that they think it's the latter. I really do. Because they've already tried that theory once. You want to talk about stupid? They knew how flawed Hillary Clinton was. And they said, well, what the hell? It's going to be Donald Trump. Anybody can beat Donald Trump. Apparently anybody but Hillary, could beat Donald Trump because she's the single worst presidential candidate in my lifetime. I mean, listen, think about this. People wonder all the time about the relationship between her and her husband. And it was a lot of conversation during the campaign. But just think about this. Think if she starts to give him a hard time about anything, right? He sits across the table and goes, let me just remind you of something. You lost to Barack Obama, who was a state senator 4 years earlier, and Donald J. Trump. I beat George Bush 41. End of discussion, man. You just sit there, eat dinner, and keep quiet. because you got nothing to say, all right? She's just the worst damn candidate, and Obama was the one who really ended her career. He really did. And I'll tell you how, it wasn't just because he beat her. There are moments in American politics that are not forgettable when you think about a person, right? So for me and Hillary Clinton, it's a Clinton-Obama debate in 2008. They're seated at a table next to each other, and Hillary Clinton is making the argument that there's a double standard that applies to her in terms of likability because she's a woman. Barack Obama, if you recall, was acting like he wasn't paying attention. And he was staring down at his pad and taking notes on his pad. And he interrupted her and he turned and said, "Come on, Hillary, you're likable enough." I turned to my wife and I said, "This is over." He just ended her. Likable enough. Like, that's the greatest insult ever, right? In politics. Oh, you're likable enough. Enough for what? He just side glanced her, dismissed her, and said without saying it, "No one likes you. No one likes you." And it became a moniker that she wore for the rest of her political career. It's like, Dan Quayle. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. You think about Dan Quayle, you think of one of two things, right? You're no Jack Kennedy or potato. Right? Not fair, not right, but there are big, big public moments. I was involved in one of those too. What do you think of when you think Marco Rubio? Probably that moment in the debate where he repeated himself 4 times when I was going after him. And he just melted on the stage in front of everybody. And I don't think that Marco will ever recover from that to run for president. I mean, he'll keep his Senate seat in Florida, but he will never recover. So I think that, they better nominate someone who's likable, and they better nominate someone who is acceptable alternative to Donald Trump. And I don't believe a socialist is an acceptable alternative to Donald Trump. So I think it will work. Bernie Sanders won't be nominated. He's a protest candidate. A great protest candidate, but a protest candidate. And by the way, he'll be 79 years old on Election Day. The American people are not electing somebody, I don't believe, who's 79 years old. I don't care how spry he seems. That's what I would call him all the time if I were running against him. I don't want to hear any conversation of Senator Sanders' age. He's very spry. Because you never say, let's see, let me pick you, sir, right there. How old are you? Yeah, 50. You never hear someone say about a 50-year-old, he's spry. Right? Look at him, he's spry. No. You're like 70 plus before they start throwing spry at you, right? So I wouldn't criticize Bernie Sanders for being too old. I just call him spry all the time. And they say, are you trying to bring his age? No, I'm not. I'm saying he's ageless. Look at him. He's spry. And everybody at home will be going, oh, man, he's spry, right? Trump's praying for Pocahontas. I mean, seriously, because here's what America's thinking right now. You know what we need to fix this country? Let's get a really liberal Harvard professor who thinks she was an American Indian. Put that in the Oval Office, and we're going to solve all of our problems. No, I don't think that works. Now, those are the known quantities, right? The known quantities are Sanders, Warren, and Biden. Now, I'm in Pennsylvania, and I am an alum of the University of Delaware. So I am not going to sit up here and criticize my man, Joe Biden. But let's remember a few things. He's run for president twice and hadn't ended all that well both times, both at his own hand. Right? You had the plagiarism scandal in 1988 when he ran the first time. And then you had the ill-advised comments regarding Barack Obama in 2008 when he said he's the first African-American who has a chance to win because he's clean. Only Joe Biden knows what Joe Biden really meant by that. But here's the favor Trump's done to Biden, which is why I think Biden is the most viable Democrat to defeat Trump. Is, remember, after that, people used to call him Crazy Uncle Joe, right? He looks like the model of stability now. Right? I mean, Joe Biden, they're like, Joe Biden, he's stable, he's you can count on him, he never's off the rails. I'm like, Joe Biden is never off the rails? Do we remember Joe Biden? But because he can appeal to white working class voters in this Commonwealth, in Ohio, in Michigan, and in Wisconsin, he is dangerous. And if he stays on the rails, he's dangerous. As for everybody else, other than Biden, Warren, and Sanders, who the hell knows? None of them have ever been in the national spotlight, ever. Now, I was in the national spotlight for years before I ran for president. And I can tell you that once you run for president, it's different. When you're in the national spotlight and you're not a candidate for president, everybody thinks you're amusing. You're interesting. You're intriguing. They like your stories. When you announce for president, they go, it's all bullshit. Let's find out where he's lying. And they are on you. The lights are really bright, and you either shine or you melt. So as to all the rest of them, Kamala Harris, John Hickenlooper, Jay Inslee, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar. I can't name all of them. Just keep putting in names of senators who want to be president, right? I don't know how they're going to be when they get on that stage, and neither do you. So they could wind up nominating one of those people, but anybody who say they know is just lying to you. Because until you're in the middle of it, I'm telling you, you don't know what it's like. Kamala Harris learned this. I'll give one last part to this incredibly long answer. Kamala Harris recently got criticized because she was on a radio show saying that she thought pot should be legalized all across the country because it brings people joy. To further amplify the point, she said, I smoked pot in college. I love sitting in college and smoking pot and listening to Tupac Shakur albums. Except that Tupac didn't release his first album until 6 years after she was out of college. Now, is that disqualifying for someone to be president? No, it isn't. However, you know she's been telling that BS story for 10 years in California when she was running for AG and when she was running for Senate to try to make herself sound cool. And no reporter ever checked her on it. Why? Because, well, she's running for AG, she's running for Senate, whatever. You know, now she's running for president, they check. When did Tupac come out with an album? And they're gleeful when they find out that it was 6 years after she graduated from college. And she spent 3 days explaining herself. That's in February of 2019. If she does that in January of 2020, goodbye. Because everything will be more intense. The lights will be brighter. And they'll be looking for ways to eliminate people off the stage. So we're going to have to wait and see how these other people come at this. But right now, if I were Donald Trump, I'd be just keeping an eye on Joe Biden and have my men and women focus on all the dumb things Joe has said over the years and make sure they're cataloged. And Donald will be ready to give him a nickname, and we'll go from there. And I will make one last comment on nicknames, by the way. Notice the only adversary in Washington of the president who doesn't have a nickname. Pelosi. Why? Because he respects her. He doesn't give a nickname to anybody who he respects. And so watch what happens. He doesn't have a nickname for Biden yet. Crazy Bernie, Crooked Hillary, Little Marco, Low Energy Jeb, Lion Ted, Crazy John Kasich, right? But nothing for Pelosi. In fact, if you remember a tweet, he said, Nancy Pelosi, who I call Nancy, he knows not to mess with her. She's tough. She's a good fighter. So watch that too. That'll be a tell. It'll be a tell for who Trump's really concerned about.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions from the audience. 2 questions. Okay.
Oh, am I going to call on you? All right, sir, in the back, right there. Yes, sir.
That's great.
One of the things that those in Pennsylvania like me liked about your background and your campaigning is that you always come across as somebody who is honest and forthright. My wife and I had the pleasure of hearing you speak in 2015, and you told two stories. One was about always playing with the house's money, and the other, which really had an impact on me, is you talked about how some politicians, some people think about good enough was good enough, but not for you. Would you elaborate on those, please?
Well, on playing with house money, I mean, I think, what I was referring to there was that when you develop relationships, which is the most important thing in politics to do, and you start moving people because of those relationships more towards your point of view, not totally in your point of view, but towards it. Once they cross over that line to say, okay, it's okay to agree with this guy every once in a while, then you're playing with house money. And that should be your goal all the time, is that you persuade people enough, you compromise with them enough, you reach out to them enough, you get them to trust you enough that you're playing with house money. That no longer is it a life or death need to have any particular deal. You never want to be in a position in politics where I have to have this deal because if I don't, I'm a dead man. Because then you know what will happen. You will pay a price that will be just unaffordable for you politically, but more importantly, most of the time, it's for the constituents you represent that you pay that price. And there are certain issues where we talk about good enough just isn't good enough, right? There's certain things that are principles that don't apply to the first instance of house money. These are things where just accepting just enough is unacceptable because it violates a principle. So for instance, part of this, I think the context of when I was talking about it, when you're referring to it, was our country's relationship with Israel. There can't be anything but absolutes in that relationship, in my view. They're in the worst, most dangerous neighborhood in the world, and they are the only democracy standing there, and they're the only ones that stand for our values. Does it mean that we agree with them all the time? No. But when we disagree quietly and privately, because their existence is the only thing that should be our guiding star. Their existence, their continued thriving, growing, and their continued ability to govern themselves without outside interference is the only thing that should be acceptable to us. And that anything less than that, while it might be good enough for some, will not be good enough for those whose principles are that, given the history, that nothing short of freedom and democracy and self-determination is acceptable for Israel. And if we compromise on that, if we say, well, we're close enough, we're good enough, there, to me, that's where you fail as a leader. And the important part of the two is, and this is where having skill as a politician is really important, you got to be able to make sure you effectively communicate which is which. Both your friends and your adversaries need to know which is which. Because if they do, they can effectively, logically, reasonably respond if they choose to do so. If they don't, then they may take actions at times which make the situation worse rather than better and hurt the friendship with that country and hurt the country that you're attempting to stand up for. One of the things that I think where the president has fallen short is understanding those cross currents. This is complicated stuff. It's not easy. It's not impossible. I get it, so it's not impossible. Right? But it's complicated, and you have to understand that, and you need to be acting every day as best you can, consistent with sending those signals. Because that kind of communication is really important to a civilized, stable world. That's why I wouldn't have done some of the stuff he did in Mexico and Canada. Because going after our neighbors on either side is not a great thing to do when you live in the best neighborhood in the world. I mean, seriously, nobody wakes up in the morning worrying about a rocket attack from Mexico City. Or here comes the Royal Mounties, over the border. Holy God, watch out, Buffalo, here it comes, right? And we should appreciate the fact that we live in the greatest neighborhood in the world, both in terms of the way we treat our neighbors, but just as importantly, to understand and to be able to sympathize with Israel and the plight that they wake up every morning thinking, because they worry about all of that and more when they wake up every morning. And that was the context within which I made those comments.
Take one over here if we could.
Yes, ma'am, right there.
Thank you so much for your time this evening. At the beginning of the evening, you talked a lot about the importance of having trusted advisors who have experience and knowledge in running the country. It's not something that one person can do alone, and they have to have a great team. Then you subsequently painted a picture of kind of a vacuous, impetuous narcissist who surrounds himself with stupid people and propeller heads. How?
Well, I debate that that's the total picture, but
but those were some of the words that you used to
Yeah.
describe the president. How accountable is the Republican Party, and are the Republican leaders going forward to put someone in office who does not necessarily embody those characteristics, but is more willing to surround himself or herself with those trusted advisors and listen to their plethora of knowledge and experience to take us to the next level as a nation?
Well, let me say a few things. Both because that's where the questions led me, and because I wanted to be directly responsive to the questions. We were emphasizing the negative. Now, he's got a lot of good people around him too. Mike Pompeo is a brilliant West Point trained, Ivy League educated Secretary of State who replaced a pretty good Secretary of State in Rex Tillerson. Jim Mattis was a great Secretary of Defense. Alex Azar is really good at his job at Health and Human Services. Wilbur Ross, I think, is very good at commerce. He's got a really good White House counsel and had a good White House counsel, Don McGahn, has one now in Pat Cipollone. I think he's got a much better attorney general now than he had before in Bill Barr. I think Bill is kind of the gold standard, for Washington, D.C. lawyers, and he's had great experience, and I think he's going to do a very good job at the Justice Department. Somebody that, I was proud to support when he got nominated. So he's not completely surrounded by nitwits, right? I mean, he picked some in the beginning. But to his credit, some of them have gone, and when he's replaced them with better people. John Kelly was a much better chief of staff than Reince Priebus. Whatever it is that Steve Bannon did, no one's replaced it, thank God, right? He's gone. That's a positive for the president. The president ultimately pushed a number of these people out of there once he realized that they were doing more harm than good. And so as far as the Republicans' responsibility, I think that every election, unfortunately, when you get to the general election, comes down to a binary choice. It's not always necessarily the person we want to vote for. It's who do we have available to vote for. So like for me or any other Republican who supported Donald Trump, I'll speak for myself, he wasn't my first choice. I was. Right? But that didn't work out. And so, you then have to say to yourself, all right, all things considered, would I rather have Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? I decided I'd rather have Donald Trump. And there are people who could disagree with that and obviously did. Some Republicans who disagreed with it. A number of Democrats who did. But it's a binary choice then. Our primary process in our party, and you're going to watch it now amongst the Democrats, has come to a point where you're not necessarily always nominating the best person. You're nominating the person who survives. It's much more a game of Survivor anymore than it is King of the Mountain. And we have to examine why that is. Part of it is us. Part of it is that the American people have come to like the Roman theater. They come to like, watching us eat each other, right? And we reward that. Donald Trump, see, here's the thing I don't understand about some people's objection to Trump. He's not acting any differently now than he did during the campaign. From the very first debate, when I'm standing up on the stage in Cleveland, there's 40 million people watching, and Megyn Kelly starts with that question about all the different nicknames that he's used to describe women over the years, and he interrupts and he goes, just Rosie O'Donnell, nobody else, right? And the place bursts out laughing, and everybody lets it go. And they kind of liked it. And all the nicknames for people and the demeaning and the coarseness and all the rest of that, more people voted for him than voted for anybody else in the primary season. So, and he's not giving us anything different than what he promised he would give us. When people say to me, could you please tell him to stop tweeting? I said, well, what made you think he was going to? He was tweeting the entire campaign. You think after he won with all that tweeting, he's going to go, I should stop doing that. I only won the presidency. Maybe I should stop behaving that way because I only ran for one office one time and I won. We reinforced the behavior. We're reinforcing the behavior. So Republicans, not just Republicans, but Americans, have to decide if they want a different type of politics, then they have to support a different type of politics, and they have to conduct themselves differently too. We can't have people outside every rally yelling and screaming at each other and throwing punches at each other. Every time there's a Supreme Court decision, we can't have people on the steps of the Supreme Court wanting to kill each other. That's where we are right now. And I would argue to you that that's not a creation of Donald Trump. That Donald Trump is a symptom of that conduct. And that conduct really started back in the mid-90s when Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton started treating the presidency with a lot of disrespect in the way they started to conduct it in the beginning, which gave rise to Newt Gingrich and that Republican Congress, which went to war with the Clintons. And so then we had everybody picking their sides. And even though, I hear people all the time saying, where are the Republicans to stand up to say Donald Trump is wrong? I'm like, they're the same place the Democrats were to say that Bill Clinton was wrong for having sex with an intern in the Oval Office. This should be something we should all come together on. A married president should not be having sex with an intern young enough to be his daughter in the Oval Office. But we couldn't come together on that. Democrats defended him to the end. They set the standard. Republicans are now saying, look at that. Now you want us to be the ones to stand up? Good, there you go. We'll catch you later. No. And so it starts then. It then continues with the people who stand at George W. Bush's inaugural in 2001 and call him an illegitimate president because they don't like the result. And it continues on all through his presidency. He was called illegitimate by Democrats over and over and over again. So then what happens? Barack Obama wins. Republicans turn around and go, oh, we know how to play this game. He's illegitimate because he wasn't born in this country. Completely ridiculous. Yet, the current president and others engaged in that. And no one stood up. No one stood up to stop him. And now Trump is here, I would argue, in part because people have said, all right, well, if this is the politics we're going to have, watch this guy do it. And it's now at a whole new level. What I'm hoping will happen, I'm not waiting for a crisis of conscience because I think I'll be waiting too long for that. I am counting on sheer exhaustion. I think another 6 years of this politics by both sides will lead the American people in 2024 to just be exhausted. Exhausted. Not be able to keep the pace up. The pace of this is crazy. Every day there's breaking news, you know. What's happening now, you know, and you're like, holy God, here's the apocalypse. You're like, oh no, it's just like another report from, you know, some leaker who's saying that something's going to do something to somebody here. We need to decide what kind of politics we want. And I'll tell you an anecdote from when we were campaigning in New Hampshire. My wife did a lot of door-to-door. And she said this happened a number of times, but one story in particular, she went to a Republican door a week before the New Hampshire primary. And she said, hi, I'm Mary Pat Christie. I'm married to Governor Christie. And the woman answers the door, says, oh, sweetheart, I'm a Republican, and God, do I love your husband. You know, he is so smart and articulate and direct and honest. So we're voting for Trump, of course, but we love your husband, and we hope that he makes him vice president. And Mary Pat says, well, wait a second. If you think that Chris is so smart and articulate and direct and honest, why are you voting for Trump? And she grabbed both of Mary Pat's hands. And she said, oh dear, we don't need another politician. Now, politician has become, over the years, a dirty word, an epithet, a bad name to call somebody. What I'm hearing from your question, and what I've heard from a lot of folks here tonight when we spoke before, is maybe we should have a politician. Maybe we should have somebody who knows how to compromise, who knows how to work the angles, who knows how to bring people together, who knows that compromise is not a dirty word. I think we need to get a little more exhausted before we get there, because politician is still a dirty word. Not quite as dirty as lawyer, but it's close. And I think that's where we are. We've brought this on. America gets the democracy that it asks for and that it demands. Not every day, but on the big days like Election Day. We get it. And we set this up this way. I'll leave you one last thing, because this is obviously a really involved, interested group, because if you're out here on Monday night listening to this, you're on the team. Right? You love this country, you care about it, and you're interested. My favorite founding father is not Washington or Jefferson or Franklin or Madison or Hamilton. Musical's great, but not him either. My favorite founding father is John Adams. Now, some people say it's because he was fat and cranky. And, you know, there's some validity to that. But here's the bigger reason. John and Abigail Adams were the mother and father of the Revolution. John Adams was the guy who stood day after day after day after day on the floor of the Continental Congress saying, independence is the only thing that will secure for us our liberty and our freedom. And we must be independent. And if you ever watch the old 1776 movie, the musical, you know, you have them sitting in these hot rooms saying, just sit down already. Sit down, John. For God's sake, John, sit down. Right in this town. And John wouldn't sit down. And Abigail let him go. Here, Europe, to raise money for the revolution. Years on end away from his wife and his children. And if you want to read the real background music of the revolution, get the book of the letters between John and Abigail Adams. They're not only extraordinary love letters between two people who really loved each other, they are the background music to the revolution. And Adams, as he was nearing his death, was very concerned about where the country was going. Remember, he and Jefferson died on the same day, on 4th of July, on the 50th anniversary of the country's founding. As he was getting close to that day, Adams wrote something in his diary that I want to share you with and leave you with tonight. He wrote it for posterity. He wrote in there, I'm writing this for posterity. For us. He didn't know us. He couldn't have imagined this America. But he knew there and prayed that there was going to be someone sitting here years from now who would read it and listen. Here's what he wrote. He said, "You shall never know the price that was paid to secure for you your liberty. I pray you make a good use of it. For if you do not, I shall repent in heaven for ever having made the sacrifice at all." In the last couple of years, I've wondered what Adams is thinking. I've wondered if he's repenting in heaven for having made the sacrifice watching what he's watching. And I'm confident he's watching. I believe in heaven. I believe in eternal life. And I believe John Adams is celebrating that eternal life with his wife in heaven. We need to answer that question because we're going to be judged. We will be. Everyone is. No one escapes judgment. And I don't mean just God's final judgment. I'm talking about our children and our grandchildren will judge what we did with this power and authority that we have in running this country when we have it. And we need to decide, what do we want that to be? Do we want Adams to be repenting in heaven? I think not. So we can bemoan this current situation as much as you want or not, depending upon your political point of view. But I don't think any of us believe that this is what the founders had in mind. I don't mean we shouldn't argue. We should. They designed the country to be an argument. But an argument in search of a resolution, not an argument just in search of the next argument. And that's where I think we need to get to as a country. And I think Adams is our guiding star, as he always was. As he was on the floor of the Continental Congress down the street here, as he was as the first vice president of the United States, as he was as the first occupant of the White House, when he said, I pray only good and decent men rule under this roof. That inscription is still on the mantelpiece in the state dining room. I was there just 3 weeks ago, and I always stop and read it because it's in our heart what we want our country to be, and just as importantly, what the world wants us to be. And this book that I've written, I hope, is a window in to not only the time that we live in right now, but also to the fact that anybody can change this if they want to. Because if I come from a CPA father who's the first in his family to ever go to college, and a mom who is second generation American and never went to college, the idea that they produce someone who could actually credibly run for president of the United States tells you how incredible this country is. And I hope when I went to that school earlier today, gives those kids hope that they can do the same thing, but more than hope, an obligation that they owe it to do it. So I'm not ready to give up. And I'm not ready to blame any one particular side. I'm ready to blame everybody. But blaming them by saying, this is a gift we've been given. What are we going to do with it? And are we going to leave it in a better condition for our children than we found it? If we don't, there's going to be a heavy responsibility and judgment placed upon us. And that's why I named the book Ultimately Let Me Finish. Because I'm not done yet. I'm not done continuing to try to fight that fight. I don't know whether it'll be in public office or as an agitator from the outside, but it'll be some way or another, because I believe what Adams said is true, that we have an obligation to make use of the liberty that he sacrificed so much to secure for us, that so many others have sacrificed to maintain for us. It's our turn now. It's our turn to fight. So let's stop complaining and let's start fighting. That's where I'm at. Thank you all.
Thank you, Governor.